welcome to another episode of The Buzzer Race. I'm your host, Nikhil Ranjan.
And I'm your co-host, Teddy Trakas.
And for our guest today, we have Connor Harrison, the famous writer of the Connor Harrison's History Notes for Kurtamen. Welcome, Connor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so could you kind of just go ahead and introduce yourself, give a little background information, and then tell us your favorite movie?
Yeah, well, my name is Connor Harrison. I was a JCLer in Florida. I graduated in 2010. After that, stayed involved primarily through co-coaching teams. During that time, wrote the notes and tried to keep up with them and make them longer and share them out and all that. I currently now live in Massachusetts, and my favorite movie, I would say, so I used to always say Back to the Future for this, and I've sort of thought recently, is that still my number one? Is there something else out there? But I was Back to the Future. Good, solid choice, I think.
No, yeah, that's a totally good choice. I have to say, I only saw Back to the Future like last year or something, so I was very, very far behind in the trend, but it was good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think, did you feel like it had, it's this sort of timelessness, not, no pun intended, but like,
yeah, I mean,
I think whether you're, whatever generation you are, or anything like that, I think it's one of those movies that you can appreciate, and I think it's relatable and fun and all that. So
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like, it's a little cheesy, seeing, because I mean, just the quality of like what's happening in sci-fi and stuff like that has changed so much, but I mean, it was still so much fun to watch. So I mean, I think it's
the Cubs winning the World Series, so
Oh yeah, that is true. So yeah,
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, what about the World Series?
They called when the Cubs were gonna win.
Oh, yes. Yes. I think that's in part two. Maybe it's in the first one, but I remember, because they have all the sports stuff in part two. So I actually caught on TV the other day, and I was like, oh, that's funny. Like all these things that did or did not happen through 2015, we're now seeing.
Yeah, no, it was interesting for her. It was interesting to see what they kind of predicted. So yeah, I think we can kind of just dive right into things. So the first big thing is like, how did you get into Latin?
So Latin for me, I was privileged to be able to start it in 6th grade. It wasn't Latin 1. It was called Intro to Foreign Languages. My teacher was David Jackson, and who was pretty new to OCAL at the time. And I had one of my closest friends, Jose Molina, in the class as well. And I think basically just the combination of having Mr. J as a teacher and having close friends in that Intro to Foreign Language class made me want to continue it. At the end of 6th grade, it was like, okay, you taking French, you taking Spanish, that was what OCAL offered at the time, or do you want to stick with Latin? And I said, okay, I'll do Latin. So I would say one notable thing though, at the end of that year, I think it may have been April or May, this is 2004, Mr. J had us play Kurtamen in class, just very basic, like I think even just like study for a test, like using the buzzer system basically. So I think that was my very first like exposure to Kurtamen, and I'd heard of it and I was like, okay, this is fun. And obviously it would take several years for me to get really, really into it. But from that moment, I was like, okay, this is cool, watching it, playing it. This is a cool world to be in.
Yeah, so I mean, as I've mentioned before, like this seems to be a very staple thing teachers do, where they kind of have you play Kurtamen and they kind of feel out like, oh, okay, this kid seems like they want to play. This kid seems pretty good. Maybe we can get them in. So it's always fun to hear that, like, that's how a lot of people's experiences went, because that's how mine went.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, you didn't really get into Kurtamen for a few years, but you kind of played a little bit on like the local level and stuff, like you played here and there. And so I'm curious, like how you got into the local level and played, and like kind of how that like JCL experience as a whole was for you playing in like the local.
Yeah. So I think so. 8th grade was, and this is like Latin B, so it's Latin 1 through 7th and 8th grade. I think that's how a lot of schools do it. And at the end of 8th grade, I went to my first state, Florida State Forum, and that for me, I then had to make a decision. Okay, do I want to continue Latin in 9th and 10th grade, or do I want to go reset and take Spanish or French? And I was actually at that point leaning towards the direction of maybe being done. And then I went to state, and that's what made me say, okay, like I want to be in this. So I think more than just Kurtaman early on was just the JCL experience, was taking the test. Like I wasn't even remotely competitive in 8th grade, but just the vibe, okay, this is fun. And it didn't feel like just like a school trip. Like you go, maybe you spend a few nights somewhere, you go camping or something. Like that stuff was always fun, but this felt something different. And again, I always go back to, was it because I had the Jose's, because I had like a teacher I really liked? I do think those things matter early on. But as far as Kurtaman, in 9th grade, I did a little bit of the local stuff, was sort of dabbling in history, but not really, like, which is being on the team. Maybe if I get a question in the whole 5-round tournament, like I'm psyched about it. But I think it was fun. There was something cool about it back then, because like Oak Hall, like I think Florida, in that like 90s and 2000s was good at Kurtaman national level, but not really, no one was coming from Oak Hall then. That was very Leon happy, I think. Maybe some McClay. I don't, Mr. J is definitely a better historian on that part of FJCL history than I am, but it was just cool being kind of in this local thing, and it didn't feel too serious. I wasn't at all thinking about nationals or kind of. I think now it always feels like nationals to me is like the end of kind of the chapter, and then we restart in August. We have Yale as sort of like the first tournament, and then it feels like that's the cycle that Kurtaman's on. But back then it was just kind of more in the moment, just enjoying those. Let's drive up to Tallahassee. Let's drive down to Tampa, whatever it is. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really interesting to hear, because I think like Teddy and I can both attest to this. When like at least in like the more like recent scene, it's been a lot of like nationals is like the end, and then you reset. Like in a month or two, there's like a tournament already coming up again. So maybe, I don't know. I feel like maybe having a longer break would probably be a nicer thing for some players, I think, because I mean that sounds like a pretty big like thing to have. Like like you don't really have to reset that hard after every nationals. Like, oh, I need to start competing in like a month or two again.
Yeah, and that's actually, thank you for making that point. Maybe this is obvious, but back then, and again, this is 2006, I'm in 9th grade, like there isn't a Yale. There's no collegiate tournaments. I think Harvard was the first. I'm sure people can correct me on that. I think that was like 2008 or 9. Back then it was like Kurtaman World was local. Like, yeah, we knew about nationals, but in state, I think that was sort of like for a while, I even said I liked state better in nationals, because I thought it was more kind of fun and like, really like overall sweepstakes. Like it was like every point counts between us and, McClay and Leon. I would say I like nationals, more now, but yeah, back then I think it was all much just by nature, it was more local. And so I think it's good to make sure we're always keeping that in mind, because yeah, nationals is exciting, but for, people who are new to Kurtaman, you'll start at a local tournament, and if it, you want that to be the most amazing experience, whether you win, whether you don't, whatever, like, oh, that's just fun. Like now I do want to try to get to state or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think locals is a big step. So as we've talked about a bit, but I wanted to go in a bit more now, is the fact that like you didn't start playing Kurtaman for a while, or at least at like the national level, you didn't play for a very long time. And I'm curious what your thoughts were on Kurtaman as someone watching a lot of the playing happen. Like, like as a spectator, like what were your kind of like thoughts on it versus once you became a player?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I think for me, I was just so like awe-inspired by like how good uh, people were, just in general, like, whether it was a big state or a small state, like, the good players on any team, being someone who wasn't in it, I was just so impressed. And I'm still impressed now when I see players like this. But I think the big difference is I wasn't thinking about it as sort of strategically as I do now. I think there's a lot of high IQ discussion of Kurtaman that happens these days about, where to buzz is like the surface of that, but people really get into it. And I think that's like a whole fun kind of analytics in itself. But I think just being a spectator when I'm like 16, 17, it was just like, wow, people are so fast. And I could like, oh, that was a great buzz. If it were history, I was starting to get pretty good at history by then. I could understand that. But and then I guess the second part, and this is something you know of yourself or you see from people you're around, is just the work that goes into it. I mean, I think what's hardest to get people to understand who are like outside of this world is, it's not, you're not going to trivia with your friends. Like, I love it, but people spend hours, days, literally weeks of their life studying for this. And that's not considered like weird or like, whoa, why are you doing that to like the best people? And I think especially today with how amazingly competitive and how there's so many, it's like the NBA, there's so many good Kurtaman players right now. All of them are putting in the work, maybe some a little bit more than others, but it's hours. And I think I was awe-inspired in part because I knew how hard everyone was working, Florida, Virginia, Texas, et cetera, that we played against the Nationals.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think there's just like, once you get involved in Kurtaman from like a player side, I think things change a lot because like there are a lot of things you just don't consider. I feel like just watching. I know like I had come in through like Quiz Bowl, and so I had a bit of an idea of like how to play a buzzing game, but then it's just a different realm entirely. Like, I don't know, it's very cool to watch. Like, just the difference of like how much advanced players have to like put in time versus like novice and intermediate. I mean, you still have to put in a lot of time respectively, right? Because in advance you're building from like a foundation, but it's just ridiculous. Like, there's so much. It's actually absurd.
It is, yeah. And maybe we'll jump to all this later, but I'm always fascinated about thinking about how can we give the parameters, more on each subject, and some places do syllabuses really, sort of seriously. Some other states / tournaments don't. But like, what's the balance on that to both give, kids what they need to kind of like, okay, you do have a finite world of knowledge, like it isn't unlimited, while also respecting that there are people who really want to dive in and get the super hard stuff. Like, that's an interesting balance to me, is making it accessible, but then also having maybe stuff in advanced semifinals, finals. That's like, okay, like you really like know your stuff.
Yeah, no, that is definitely a hard balance. And I think although we can talk about this probably in more depth a little later, I think that pyramidal question style is kind of the getting to that kind of reward the insane deep cuts, as people say, but then also like reward players for knowing like, still the foundational facts that you should know about whatever the question's asking.
Right.
I think it's like a pretty healthy balance to start for sure. So I wanted to continue with this and go into your actual experience as a player at the national scene. So for most people who don't really know, it wasn't really till the summer of 2009 that you were getting like super, super big into history and becoming a Kurtaman player. This is before your senior year, before like you really like were getting into it. And you become the main history person for Florida's advanced Kurtaman team, which is just ridiculous. I think that you can do that in such a short amount of time. I mean, like, Florida is known for being such a competitive team, and the fact that you can do it in like, I would like pretty much like a year, a little less than a year, is like a very impressive feat. And so I have like two questions here that I really want to talk to you about. Is like, What led you to decide to start doing it? You're kind of like summer going into your senior year, and then like how did you do it?
Yeah, no, well, I thank you. I appreciate the kind words. I think there's few things there. One, on just a practical level, Ben Van Gelder, you guys might know him. He was the year above me. He went to Oak Hall and he did history lit and language, but he was really had that history spot when I was a junior. He was a senior. So I think I played on the state team and again, it was more just was there, maybe got a question, I don't remember. But with him leaving, I saw, okay, if anything, like there is a clear void to fill here just for Oak Hall. Like I can learn history and I will actually get the chance to be the quote unquote main person for the local stuff and then hopefully for state. And then the more kind of long-term, dream was, okay, let's see if I can get all the way to nationals. So I think I did get lucky with that Ben had graduated, and then I think there was some competition that year, but I don't, as far as I recall, there wasn't like this, oh, I have to worry about this amazing history person from this other school who's already going to take Ben's spot. So I kind of had the vacuum to fill there. And then I guess as far as just the putting in the time, so this actually had started the year in summer 2008, but in summer 2009, we really ramped up what we called marathon days. And marathon days were where this is Ben, I think really Ben Van Gelder came up with this, but then Jose and Gabriel, were quickly in it too. Or we would get to Starbucks, like one that was near where we all lived at like 6 a.m. And we would stay there. We would go, there's a gym nearby, we would get lunch, we get dinner, but other than that, we were at Starbucks till it closed at 10 p.m. So we did I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of those that summer 2009. Again, this is Ben's last year, so he's like studying really hard for nationals, but I was able to start really studying history in depth there. And so by the time I was coming into my senior year in September, I felt like I had a good foundation, especially Empire I started with, and memorizing the dates of the emperors. I always coach that as like a must thing. Like if you're going to start learning history, I think Republic can be kind of difficult to organize in your mind, but Empire, you have very clear reigns. You need to know them, basically all the way through Romulus Augustulus. That to me became kind of a way I was able to really start memorizing things, is dates, is having the timelines in my mind. And that is for me like how I'm able to just think about information is sort of when it happened relative to other things.
Yeah. I think building like a narrative / timeline is pretty important, especially for history out of anything. I mean, like it's literally chronology. Like you just kind of have to. So yeah, I think the marathon days David Jackson mentioned before, but I didn't really put the connection together of who was doing it. But hearing now, taking a part of it, that just sounds absurd. Like, I mean, I can like kind of relate to having done something similar, but it's still just ridiculous to hear that you can maintain that kind of like work ethic for so long.
Yeah, I know. It's so, of course, there's like, there's probably maybe in a given hour, 45 minutes of the hour, we're just like hanging out and talking. These are like to this day, like, some of my closest friends. I mean, I live with Gabriel in this apartment. Okay. So, and his wife, I should mention, but I think that was definitely like a draw for me. It was like, these are my close friends anyway. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go to Starbucks on a Saturday and, I don't really know these guys that well. It was like, oh, like, hey man, what's up? Like, so that definitely was a huge motivating factor. And to think, okay, are we going to be on the team together? You guys are also trying out. Like, you never want to assume you're making a team or anything like that, but it's like, oh, you guys are right in, you care, obviously. So, I give those guys a ton of sort of, I don't know, just credit in my own mind about my own willingness to kind of dive into it more.
Yeah, I mean, the power of friendship, right? So it really motivates
Absolutely.
people.
But the one thing I will say about marathon days, I think, and this, when I think about this, it almost doesn't even seem like real, but I think Gabriel did, I think he did 17 of them his summer before nationals. And I think, which is like, yeah, I know, like saying, you're like, it's not even, how's that even real? And I think in that he also does like a back-to-back, like, oh, I'm going to go home at 10, wake up like 7 hours later and go back to it. So yeah, and the concentration part's tough, but you got people. We had our core group, and then maybe we had other college JCLers, maybe some of the novices, intermediates, to show up for 3 or 4 hours, and so it's sort of like Starbucks became our kind of study session place. I think that kind of helped to make it like cool and accessible for people.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. That sounds like a lot of fun. And I think group studying, it can be unproductive at times because you're gonna like start chatting and be like, oh, look at this. But I think for the most part, it's super productive because when you have people who are also working alongside you, it really motivates you, I think, to also start working just as hard.
Mm-hmm.
So you go into your final NJCL convention in 2010, I want to say, and this is at Fargo.
Fargo, yeah.
The famous Fargo Dome, I think. Was the Fargo Dome there? I don't know much about.
Oh yeah, it was there.
Okay, incredible. So this is your like first NJCL Kurtomen experience, as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
And you just make it to finals, not a big deal or anything. Okay. Just make it to finals your first time around and advanced out of all divisions. And y'all end up getting third in a super tough match with, I believe, Texas and Wisconsin were the other two states y'all were playing. And can you kind of just tell us what that tournament was like for you, like as an individual?
Yeah, no. So I felt, depth of knowledge-wise, I felt good. I felt, and Republic had been something I'd really focused on more senior year after kind of laying the groundwork on Empire. But I was just nervous, honestly. And like, it's funny coaching now, and you always, you talk to kids about nerves and how to kind of just, kind of move on from a question no matter how it goes. And I think I was relatively good at kind of in the moment, like, okay, I just messed up question 7. Now, I'll hear another history question, toss up, like 14. So I, got to be ready for that. But like between the rounds, I would feel really nervous for the next round. I would feel like, oh, like I wish I gotten that one. I mean, we've all had that feeling, but I think those feelings are multiplied when it's your very first time doing it. And I think if I feel like with having the depth of knowledge, like, of course, like that's maybe the most important thing. You got to know the stuff, but to have a year where you're kind of going through the motions and you're understanding sort of not how to play the nationals questions, but more how to play in that environment. I wish, not a regret, but I wish I had maybe gotten that in 2009 when I wasn't really going to be doing much anyway. I've been like, if I had tried out and made the team just as sort of like a alternate player, I think that would have been really good for me. So just coming into it, it's like, on one hand, yes, I'm playing 5 rounds. This is what I wanted. I'm proud of myself. But on the other hand, like, I'm not like, cool as a cucumber here. I mean, it was nervous. But I think the tournament itself, I mean, I remember being fun. I remember I only got 5 questions the whole time. I do remember that year pretty vividly. I got 1 in round 1, 2 in round 2, 0 round 3, 1 in the semis, and then 1 in the finals. And I have the specific questions in my mind, and when they came up, like in coaching years after that, I'd be like, oh, this is the 2010 round 3 because I remember it. And to this day, I'm like, oh, I wish I gotten this or that. But, I'm no regrets, obviously. I'm very happy to have gotten the experience at all. We played against a really great Texas team in the finals and a good Wisconsin team. So, the result I'm good with. I think for me personally, it's just like, oh, that question, like, God, how could I miss that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a super common experience, I think, where it's like, especially first year. I think once you start, you get to play more, which I think people underestimate how much it means just to get a year of playing, no matter like how well did you do? Like just getting a year under your belt really changes a lot. And for sure, they're the questions you hear them and you're like, how did I miss this? Or like, how did I not? But because like, once you learn the question, you learn the fact and it just sits in your head and you're like, oh my, I needed to, yeah. I mean, that's totally relatable. But I was curious how finals was for you. Because I imagine I guess semis and finals, because I can imagine like the pressure, especially for first time, can be like a lot to feel while playing.
Yeah, I think I don't think I ever had the thought in my mind in really at semis and finals, like, oh, like I'm gonna help my team win. I think my approach is more like I trust my teammates to play really well and hopefully it works out. And if I get one or two, then I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like on one hand, that I think is a more maybe down to earth approach, but maybe in that circumstance where it's like whether you are brand new or whether you played 4 years, like kind of in the round, you really have to have a lot of self-confidence, I think. And it's
Mm-hmm.
tough. It's really tough. But I think I wish I had sort of maybe been more like, all right, yeah, I got this, like feeling a little bit more confident. But I mean, in the round though, I mean, I think I was also like, this is awesome. Like I think what you just said reminded me of this is, I think, when we get caught up in talking about like Kurtamen at its highest level on nationals and, winning championships in the Hall of Fame, like that's like all that stuff is fun, but it's also not realistic for, vast majority of people who are in Kurtamen. And so I sort of feel that feeling, that not total confidence thing. Like that's how I think it is going to be for most people. And it's okay for it to be that way. I don't want to be down on myself for not feeling more confident, because I wouldn't want anyone else to be down on themselves for not being more confident, whether it's their first year or their fifth year. I mean, sometimes it's Kurtamen. That is sort of the curse of it, is it can be hard to feel that. So looking back, I think I wish I'd just been more happy about it. And I was appreciative to be there, but kind of more just like, hey, whatever. Like I'm going to college after this. Like it's all good. I'm here with my closest friends. Like what could be better, So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good takeaway, and I think that's a good mentality, because sometimes that also helps a lot of people. It's like, sure, you're not necessarily more confident, but if you're like, I'm just gonna get what I can get and do what I can do, that changes a lot. Like it really makes a difference when you don't put pressure on yourself. Like I have to get every single question that I know I can get in this round. Like I think that's a good play style, and I don't think a lot of people approach it that way, which is unfortunate. I mean, it's understandable; it's competition, but I think it's good. I think it's healthy.
For sure. Yeah.
So, I always ask this question. Everyone's always like, I don't have any one specific, favorite JCL memory. I have had thousands, and I mean, totally understandable, very relatable. But you did mention a story to me in passing that I wanted you to elaborate on, about throwing away a test. Would you be willing to go into this?
So yeah, this is funny. So I actually didn't. So throwaway test, that's actually metaphorical.
Okay.
This is, and it kind of ties in, I think, to the kind of turning more towards Kurtamen. But junior year, wasn't warming up on the Empire, but wasn't in Kurtamen yet. We would at Florida, you could take 2 tests at state. So and everyone had to pick their 2 tests, and we had I think we could take like 25 people. And so we sort of have this methodology, okay, who's taking this test? And some people double up, obviously, that's fine. So Hellenic history was like my first thing I got like really good at in JCL, and like, first thing I really like, okay, studied hard, like as anything in JCL. So I needed a second test. I kind of like done some geography and some like, random stuff, maybe half here and there. And then Greek lit. I wanted to do Greek, did Hellenic, did the Greek history, may as well do Greek lit. So, I think Mr. J, and we've joked around about this for years, I don't think he'll mind me saying it on here. he, I think, said either to me or maybe he said it to Gabriel that my second test, the Greek literature test, would be like a throwaway test. And he was joking. He didn't mean literally a throwaway test. Like, okay, maybe Connor will get like top 5, top 7 of 10. Like, that's fine. Like, he's focused on Hellenic. So I that for me was pretty motivating, because it's like, okay, like I've seen some success with Hellenic here. Like I'm kind of like figuring it out. So I wanted to prove myself to him. So I wrote up these notes for Greek Lit, went through the OCCL, and really was just trying to get real in depth there. And then we went to state, and I actually ended up getting best of show on Greek literature of all levels. So after that, like, I was like making fun of him, and we joke around about it. But that's sort of a fun memory, because I think I'm not like an ultra competitive guy who is going to get really like all rivalry-ish and on this. I'm not really like that, but for, Mr. J is like, one of the role models of my life, and, he always believes in me. He's like, oh, like, yeah, he'll do pretty well. It's like, no, man, like, I think I'm going to do really well on it, actually. So, it's a fun thing. And I think getting that double first in junior year kind of built my confidence more holistically that I could then transfer to Kurtaman. So that's a fun one. I think other than that, like favorite JCL memories, it just is like being in Vegas in 2013, just random conventions post high school coaching, being in college, going and playing cards at night with like Mike Howard, or playing Kurtaman with Mike Howard from Mass. And just sort of that kind of chillness of, coaching, we're into that, but it's not the same. I mean, you aren't supposed to get all. You are supposed to be, you're there for the kids. You're there to do whatever you can for them. And then when that part of it's done, you can kind of just enjoy nationals on the level of hanging out with your friends who also decide to come back. So I grew to really appreciate that, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's fun. Yeah, those types of stories those are the fun motivators. When someone's like, I mean, they'll probably do all, like, yeah, that I've definitely had my fair share of experience with that type of motivation, where someone's like, they'll do okay, and it's like, no, I'm here to prove you wrong now. So post JCL, you mentioned you kind of do a bit of coaching here and there, and so I was kind of curious if you want to just kind of tell us where you are now, like, as a person, how in relation to the JCL, just kind of like what you've done.
Yeah, so now, like I said, living in Massachusetts, I came up here in 2016 for graduate school, and I think I got really lucky coming here, and I actually lived with Michael Howard and Gabriel for a few years, and I think our Facebook group name is like Kurtaman HQ. I mean, those. I mean, like how into it those dudes are, but Mike, especially. I mean, I just have infinite respect for how much time he, not only is a Latin teacher, but Kurtaman to him, I think is really something that he wants to. He's always writing. He's always trying to come up with new stuff, and so it was really fun to be in that with the two of them, and to be in somewhere like Massachusetts that had has elite obviously and BLS and all the great things about it. But before I moved up, I went to the University of Florida for college, which is in Gainesville where Oak Hall is. So it was very easy to sort of just stay involved, and that meant, okay, like after class, let me drive back over to Oak Hall, and maybe I'll be here and I'll run the buzzers for this practice or read some questions to the intermediates or something like that. And I think just doing that throughout the year on a local level, we got to summer 2011, and Jose and me, who had also graduated with me and gone to UF with me, we were kind of in it, like, hey, like, can we coach novice, or can we kind of be involved, so that, I think that just sort of happened. And then once we had it that first year in 2011, I think that was Eastern Kentucky, we then we coached the team. They actually got second to Amol Punjabi in the
Oh wow.
at the novice finals. Yeah, Massachusetts had a comeback at the end of that one. So it was like like we were so close, but it was still like it was a really fun team. Like Jose's brother was on the team, so from there I was like, oh, I love this. Like I love coaching. I love working with the kids. Like let me just continue to try to be involved. So from 2012, 13. Up until I moved to Boston, I guess after was still coaching Florida every summer in some way. Sometimes it was more like in person, I'm there. Sometimes it was more I'm doing other stuff, but I'll try to come down for a practice or two. Maybe I'm just writing a lot of questions. But yeah, no, I'm very lucky to have gotten the opportunity to do that and have time for it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's another kind of common thread that we've seen throughout some of our interviews is like, former player going back for like, not really necessarily thinking like this is something I want to do, and then just kind of falling in love with it at the beginning. So that's always really cool.
Yeah, no, I love seeing you. Yeah, like you're saying, there's a lot of people who come back and it's like, oh, I remember them from last year. There was that super good kid on that team, and now they're coaching. Like, how cool is that? How cool is that for them? And I really, you talk about the impact teachers have is tremendous. I love seeing people who realize on a volunteer basis, whether it's for Kurtaman or another aspect of JCL, they can come in and this little work here, going nationals, chaperoning, like that's very much needed. Like this is a small world. And I think giving back whatever you can, whether it's coaching full throttle or on a smaller level, it is impactful.
Definitely. So wanted to kind of change gears a little bit. It's like somewhat in the same vein, like the first time I ever heard of you as like a novice history player is, like the Connor Harrison history notes, which is like, I think for many people, it's kind of like a Bible, like the first thing you really read like for history. And so like, I was kind of wondering like, how did that really come about? Like, especially in relation to coaching in terms of like, yeah.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It's so, yeah, that first summer, 2011, our history was, well, I don't think we had like an established like novice who had been doing out throughout the year. It was like really good. It was more kind of like our sort of scrappy category that year. And so the notes for me was saying, hey, instead of getting you to read parts of Carey and Scholar, which is already really hard to read for anyone, let alone a novice trying to figure out which exact parts of it you need to know for novice. It's like, let's try to make these into notes. So the notes today are quite a bit longer than that first version where it was very like level one. And I think even more basic back then, my perception of what you need to know at the novice level is different than what you need to know at novice level in history now. I think you need to know much more now. I think back then you could kind of have your, 40 or 45, I'm just making up a number of things that it's like, okay, if you memorize this, you're going to get some stuff at nationals. So that was the approach we took. And it was flawed at the time. This isn't ideal. Like I would love if they would dive into Scholar and Heichelheim, but we have a month and a half. It's not going to happen. So the notes are really a product of that. Saying, okay, let's see if we can push the envelope on history with just like a quick guide. And I think after that, in 2012, it was like, okay, let's take these, let's expand it to be for intermediate. So add X amount more information. And then, after that, it was, okay, we have a pretty good base here. Let's just add some extra stuff to make it sort of pretty holistic. How I think of it now is, okay, like if you know everything in the notes, then you should know most of the advanced prelim stuff, I think. And maybe I'm way off on that. But so yeah, I think Scholard, just in general is very difficult text to read. I understand that it's very, sort of renowned in the sort of historiography of Rome and all that, but For Kurtaman purposes, I think, there might be, Heichelheim's a great read, but it doesn't have, especially for Republic, it doesn't have the depth of information. And that's a lot of Empire stuff and late Empire that you need to know, but there's not one perfect source for history. Like Conti for Lit, I feel like if you read that, you're going to be really strong. Yes, there's stuff in Rose. I think they dropped Hattis, but it's Conti, go for it. You're going to be really good. History, Scholar, yeah, but there's going to be little pockets of things you're missing still. So I think that was sort of the main note's motivation.
Yeah, the Scullard is definitely not an easy read at all. But I think another kind of aspect of that is like, I'm all the way here in Texas, right? And like the girl who did history and the level above me was like, here's this packet, and it's like kind of crazy how far it's kind of circulated, not just like, within Oak Hall or Florida, but just like all over.
Yeah, no, I like talking about this a lot because I think early on, like the idea, like I wasn't like sharing notes. I don't think I've ever been opposed to that, but I think for that team in 2011, like it didn't even occur to me like, oh, someone else might find this helpful. For me, it was very like narrowly focused. This is just for like the one or two kids on our team. And then I think maybe in 2014 or 15, I put it on the Facebook group, and I think, I feel very strongly that, we should really share notes, as often as possible. And I know like states are going to have their own sort of like, here's our stuff and here's our specific kind of nuggets that might come up in the semis. Like we're going to guess that, like, that's totally cool, obviously. But I guess I felt like, well, Scullard is, if I think it's causing, headaches for people in Florida, well, certainly, you could say that for any historian, so I'm really happy that it's circulated, not because it's very nice to hear people say kind things and to give like an autograph here or there. Like that's awesome. Like that's like a nice moment. But for me, like if someone's picking up the packet, my name could not even be on it. They're like, okay, this is helping me get better Kurtaman. This is helping make this less stressful and more fun and build my confidence. Like that, genuinely, like that's really like what I care about. And there's a lot of good packets out there for history and for the other subjects that I think collectively we've all done a good job of sharing around. And I think Ryan Vincent from Tennessee even, I think he has a website. I'm not sure if it's his school site, but he has like all these resources you guys have probably seen. Like, I think if kids see that, it's like, oh, okay, like, yes, you should read the books. Yes, you do need to read Scullard. If you want to be like the greatest historian ever, you don't try to use notes to do it. You go make your own notes from the books. But if you're just trying to get there to start off, then yeah, I think we can give people that.
Yeah. I think the prevalence of kind of guides and notes has been really big for like, if we're trying to expand the game beyond, just the people like, so there's not so much of a gap between, those who've read the Scullard and the Heichelheim and like have all this stuff down. And then those who like maybe don't have access to it and just like want to learn a few things. I think it's pretty helpful.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And then, so another thing is kind of like, you're writing this guide as you're coaching. And so like, I was wondering like, how did those kind of interact? Like, were there any, I know you touched on the chronology approach of like, knowing the rain dates, but like, are there any other specific kind of takeaways that helped you while writing the guide and while coaching?
Yeah. I think a lot of like hardcore Kurtamaners are really fascinated by this question, which is, we were kind of talking about this earlier, like how do you divide up what we should ask a novice, intermediate, and advanced? Like how do you conceptualize that? That's going to differ by tournament, by whether it's nationals or not. So I think just the more questions I heard, the more I just personally got better at Kurtaman as post high school, as I kept up with it. I began to think on a more confident level of what should go in the notes relative to like what's, like you're saying, going to help a novice versus an intermediate. And I think how much I push the notes is something to use really dependent on their, where they were at and how motivated they seem to dive into the text. Like it maybe if it was like a first tryout, for instance, and it's like, okay, like history seemed pretty good, but we were really spotty on, Republic. Then I might point to, okay, well, make sure you get all that base stuff down. Like, make sure you use the notes. Just make sure you know all the, I don't want to say easy stuff, but all the sort of like mainstream things in history that we can expect to come up really at any level. You have to know what, like, salinator at Mataras River. Like, that's, just random stuff like that's like, okay, like you got to know that. So if they already like kind of have that base down, then I would turn more towards, okay, here's within the Scholar, maybe read chapter 17, 19, 23, to give them a little bit more guidance there. And then if it's advanced, the notes do have some late Empire stuff, but like kind of the really weird wonky stuff is, in Heichelheim. So it would point to that. So it was notes are sort of like a first, like, okay, do you know the base stuff? Great, let's move on to tax. If not, then maybe let's spend some more time with the notes.
Yeah, no, I think that's very cool to hear, especially while coaching. I think because it's kind of like a living thing in that regard, because it was like changing kind of as you went and coached and learned and wrote. And yeah, I think that's just very cool to hear that that's kind of how the guide came about, because it's like, oh, we're like, this just get randomly written up, was there a motivation to it? And it's neat to hear that it's like, oh, this was designed originally to help players, and now it's literally used by most players to be like, this is where I start, at least, because it's an amazing like place to start, right? Because it's very readable, so you can also like digest the information and not be carrying Scholard where you get a long tangent and or like analogy to some British battle that you have no idea about.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think where I always, this is, I think, the big flaw in the notes for me is that I'm not trying to capture like the kind of the wording of the leading clues that might appear, especially in this pyramidal format. I wasn't trying to do that. I wasn't trying, okay, here are all the buzzwords. Like, if you hear this, it's going to be this. Like that to me is where you really have to just go into the books. I'm not going to try to. So exactly, the notes are more like, okay, here is just the information, not how it's worded in Scholard or Heichelheim. Therefore, yeah, long-winded question. You're looking for some crazy clue that's going to give it away. Like, you're not going to get that from the notes. And if you're like a really like elite, historian, like that's the fun stuff to talk about. But I think, again, going back to the vast majority of people are not there, and they, why would they be? It's just, okay, let's just learn the information. And especially at local tournaments, I feel like, I can't speak to everyone, but I think for Florida, like, the questions, they're more kind of just standard, shorter, probably, maybe, just Kurtami questions. You're not getting into these, really awesome, like Kearney-esque, ways of writing things. It's more kind of just straightforward. So, yeah, I think that's the main thing is getting into the sources for all those, like, oh, well, here's this, weird thing about whoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to kind of like change gears once more here, because I want to now really just talk about thoughts on the JCL as a whole, in certain aspects of it. So, as you mentioned earlier, in high school, you studied a lot of the Greek subjects. You mentioned Hellenic history is the first thing you really got good at, and then you did Greek lit. I don't know if Florida splits Greek life and Greek lit, or if it's one test like Nats does.
It's funny, they don't have, unless it's changed, they do not have Greek life actually at all. Yeah.
Interesting. So Greek, though, is kind of a largely overlooked area for the JCL as a whole. I mean, like Dr. Sango Jackson has, like, almost every year at Nationals, talks about the NGE, and really tries to, advocate for it. But for the most part, like, there just aren't that many people taking Greek, mostly because, schools aren't offering it. And so that's a pretty big, like, motivator to not really do Greek stuff, because you don't really have any intro place to start with. And I was curious, kind of like, your thoughts on really, like, Agon coming back to Nationals. And Agon's a pretty good, because like it's a competition, so it's a really good way to bring Greek back into JCL in a bigger light than it already has been. And I was wondering just like what you thought of that, and like what you kind of hope comes from this.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I love Agon. I'm so happy they did it this year. Like if you tell me now, hey, we're gonna have Agon and nationals for the next like 20 years, like that would be make me so happy. I don't know if there's any single thing I care about more as like a having it at nationals than having Agon for all the reasons you've said. So just for analogy for me, like I'm not just saying this, like I've never been a strong Latin student. I majored in it and it was pretty good in college, but I always was having to work really hard to keep up in class. And so on its own, would I be into Latin if it weren't for JCL? Probably not. By this, and Kurtamen specifically, I think for me, whether it's creatives, whether it's the testing, whether it's Kurtamen, you have those areas to kind of strengthen your love of the language itself. Similarly, of Agon, I like to believe that, on one level, you're a kid, like me who did Hellenic history, wasn't able to buzz on it. Now you have that opportunity. You have the Kurtamen, you can bring your history knowledge to that. That's cool. But on another level, does Agon mean we can also grow Greek as a language? Does the Hellenic kid who goes and plays Agon, does he after nationals say, you know what, it'd be really cool to dive into the Greek language? I know it's tough, but like, why don't I give it a shot? Or is there some online thing I do? And so for me, like having Agon is only a net positive. Like even if it doesn't have that conversion with actually growing Greek language itself, like we are, no matter what, giving an opportunity for the Greek subject kids to get to play. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that's a big thing that I always talk about is kind of opportunity and offering it. And I think Agon's a very good way to do that because, like kid goes in, they don't really know Greek, but they're like, wait, I can't play any of the language questions because I don't know Greek. And maybe you'll motivate them to learn some Greek because they're like, hey, I can be competitive if I can just pick up even a bit of language, because not that many students study Greek. It's just not offered nationwide very much. And I was wondering, did you see enough of like Agon at Nats? Like, did you get to watch some of the rounds?
I actually don't know if I caught much or any of it at nationals. I mean, I guess I was working during the day, so I think I had to skip a fair amount of things. But we did the years we'd done it previously, so like 2013, 14. I love that the environment seemed less tense, more fun, more relaxed than Kurtamen. And I think moving forward, it's important to kind of keep it there. Like obviously, like it is a competition inherently, but we can keep the questions easier. We can keep it's all one level, right? I think right now, like that makes sense to me. Let's just have it be this more down to earth kind of thing. I think that's a really good kind of foil to Kurtamen, which I think has wonderful sportsmanship. It's not a matter of that, but it's a matter of saying, okay, this does feel a little bit more tense. This has been around a lot longer. This has much more sort of history behind it. So yeah, I think they complement each other really well.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy to see because I got to like mod a bit and help out, and it was absurd to see how good kids were. Because when you don't have like the buzzing competition to really see like how much do these students actually know about the Greek language, the history, the culture, the myth, like it was like, wow, these people know a lot. Like it wasn't like we had the highest team scoring going into semis had like whatever, like a low number of points pretty much. Like it was like people were putting up competitive numbers, which I think is really good. And I mean, I think this nationals had 21 teams, so like I think like that is a good sign that like hopefully it can keep up like that, or maybe even grow, because I know a lot of like players Teddy played. I think a lot of people enjoyed Agon a lot. I think they found it fun. It wasn't, as you said, super serious. I mean, people were still competing, but it wasn't like Kurtamen. Kurtamen has this like bloodthirstiness that's just kind of sitting there. It's like a bit too tense, one might say.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm really happy to hear though that it had that easiness, but like you're saying, it also was competitive and people were getting stuff. And the 21 teams, I mean, that's I mean, we haven't done this formally in like 6 years. I mean, the fact that people are, I mean, that to me is such huge evidence for that this should continue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so along the lines of this, but now going into Kurt Tommen, I was wondering, like, kind of about your thoughts on the scene. And first, I really want to talk about the virtual setting and how you kind of think people have handled that.
Yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised by the virtual stuff. I think I had, I had been on Ventrilo and TeamSpeak, that kind of stuff previously, but I had never made the connection of, hey, we can use these things, for Kurtama. And I just assume, there's going to be lag. There's going to be some weird like flaw that makes it so it's just not the same thing. But honestly, I think the Discord stuff, the like elite thing that Mike and Gabe are running, or like the 15 rounds we played over summer, like that was awesome. Like that was great. And then I think Zoom, I think I even like more as a forum. I like seeing people on video, but I think that they seem, you have a little bit of that lag, you everyone sort of knows, but like for the most part, like it's been pretty seamless. And I think the most important thing is all of a sudden it seems like we have way more people who want to play Kurtama because now they can, because now they don't have to worry about, I can't afford to travel here or do this, or my school doesn't, whatever it is. Like those are all really, there's a lot of very specific and unique to each state, each town that has Kurtama of reasons why we don't see more people at nationals. And now the virtual stuff, it frees up so much. It's so flexible. So I want that to be something even after, hopefully the world is back to normal, whenever that is. Like, I hope we will continue with the virtual stuff like we are now, because I think it means so much to kids who otherwise, wouldn't get to go to a tournament.
Yeah, no, I think the really big thing about the virtual setting you like described very well is the accessibility, because now you have all these students who have more or less, unfortunately, I don't think the JCL designed it this way, but it's just kind of how it turns out, is there's effectively a paywall. Like you have to have money to afford, especially if you're not in the East Coast. I mean, like you automatically are barred from every single college event unless either your school has enough money and is willing to pay for you to fly and go play, or, rent some like a car, or you have to do it all out of pocket. Like, I mean, like the national convention is like, it varies, I guess, from year to year, like $400 to $500 to come play.
Yeah.
You understand like why people are doing this, but like I mean, there's convention costs, like it makes sense, but at the same time, it's just, that's like you are automatically financially barred. And I think the virtual setting really just skips that. As long as you have an internet connection and a computer, which we can't say everyone has, and I mean, sure, is still some form of barrier, but I think it's becoming more and more normalized because the internet's just become more and more normalized, that like that's a more or less reasonable thing to assume. Whether or not they have great connection is always a different discussion, but I think it really just jumps over that paywall, because no one's going to really charge for you for online things. And for the most part, they're going to be like, just if you can get a Discord account or like a Zoom account and just connect to this thing, we need you to like join like a voice chat in the text channel, like you can play Kurtama.
Yeah, no, it's so cool to think about it. Like you really can play it. It's not like we're playing like an off version of it. No, we're playing Kurtama pretty much 98% of the way there. So I'm curious if you guys ever utilized Discord or that sort of platform for just practice in general, because it's crazy to think now, like with Florida tryouts, it was like, okay, Gainesville's sort of central relative to Tallahassee's to the north, Orlando's to the south, Jacksonville's also the northeast, so it's like, okay, everyone's coming to Gainesville, but it's like, we're asking you to drive 2 hours like one way to be here for 3 tryouts. It's like, I'm this summer we were able to I wasn't really as involved in coaching, but Discord, beyond obviously the times, Discord and Zoom are really ruling. And I think like next year, like not only for accessibility, but from just a coaching perspective, like use that, like even if it isn't going to be in person, like let's just have more touch points through Discord. You don't have to get into a car, let's use this. So
Yeah, I personally, I don't think Texas as a whole, as far as I'm aware, had ever used Discord or Zoom or anything for online practices, which is really weird because like once people did it, everyone was like, "Oh, this is so reasonable. It makes so much sense." Like
exactly.
you just click the enter button. It's like you're clicking the buzzer, and your buzz goes through. They stop reading. They call you. Like it's so intuitive once people did it, but I don't think anyone did, including myself, before like this whole pandemic started. Like I think Kearney introducing the CML was like the first real place that I saw it happen. And I was like, oh, no way. Like, this makes so much sense. Like, why did no one ever think to just do this in the first place?
Yeah, I think
Right.
also like for big states, especially like Florida, but even more so for Texas, like whenever we do state, like the winning team usually will let people join if they want, but like we only get to see them like, once or twice because, Houston, Texas, or can't talk Houston, San Antonio, Austin, like, it's not close. So, but yeah, like this year we were able to have people from Austin, Houston, San Antonio, practicing 3 to 4 times a week. Like, so I think, yeah, it's a really
That's
big
awesome.
advantage.
Yeah, so I was wondering from more of a like game perspective, are there any like certain things you either have seen change that you like and want to continue, or is there still something you're like, I think we could do this better. Maybe I want to see this kind of come in.
Yeah, I've talked to Mike Kearney about this, and he doesn't agree with me, and he has some really good arguments against. But I think we should have 4 peer history and rounds as a standard. He put out so I guess I'll back up. If you're I never was good at customs. I know a little bit, but I wasn't like the history guy is also going to get the customs question. I was relying on Jose Molina to do that on my nationals team. But that if you are only a person who knows history, then it's 3 questions around. And I'm all for asking customs. Like I understand why that's significant, why that's important. Geography too. I am pretty good at geography. But could we replace a language instead? Could we have 4 pure history, 7 language in advanced, and then 1 customs and or geography around? I'm a pretty big proponent of that. I guess sort of one big argument I have for that is lit is 4 questions, as I think it should be. But I find that the literature overall is more finite and knowledge, not that it might be in reality, but the way we ask for common, I feel is you're going to hear Augustine about every year. You're going to hear Ennius every year, and maybe we should ask the most famous and notable authors every year, but I think we could, and if that's the way it is on lit, that's fine. I'm saying, okay, on history, where we do ask a bigger pool of information, in my observation, let's have that be 4 as well. Kearney has thrown out the idea of do it 3.5. So it's 4 pure history round 1, 3 history and a customs round 2, 4, or something like that, which I think that's pretty good, but I still would say, take out the 1 language, you still have 7, and then, so I would say in terms of just like tactically, like that's something I'm big on. And going back to lit, I think I love seeing the way lit's evolved. I think it's definitely become like a more sort of sophisticated in the way the questions are written and more interesting lead-ins and all that, the pyramidality stuff. But, as you guys know, like there's like a lot of dudes in Conti, a lot of people in Conti that I don't think I've ever been asked, or people will do that's too weird and hard. Oh, Nonius Marcellus, like that's wonky. I'm like, is it? Like, if it's there, like if I don't know. I think we could keep progressing in that plane and now I understand the counter argument to all of this is, well, if you're going to make her Tommen, you're going to make people know more, then how is that making it more accessible? And that goes back to that whole question of balanced.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this discussion actually of replacing language, PCL recently did, where they
Mm-hmm.
replaced, and I think honestly, it's a fair point because from a like the perspective of a historian, like in the current setup, you are given less questions than if you're a myth player or a lit player. Just objectively, you're only getting asked 3 questions on your category, and then sure, if it's geography, usually a historian will know geography because I mean it's just productive to understand, the world you're working with when you're thinking about it. So
Exactly.
that's kind of that's fine. But customs can kind of like in some way, you just need to know language. I mean, like, if you think about it in the most basic form, all of customs is just like a bunch of different vocabulary terms that like the Romans used to refer to various things. And I totally think customs is like something we should ask because it's the life of the people we are studying. It is totally makes sense to ask. But I do agree that like historians just are now randomly being told like you don't get the same number of questions as everyone else in their category. And replacing like language, I mean, language at 8 questions already just leads to really repetitive question formats. We have like maybe 2 quid anglique significats, which first of all, I don't think are very good question formats, but you just get 2 of those.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2 translations, quick verb flip or like noun change, get the passage, maybe a PMAQ, maybe a derivatives. Like you can really by like you take 1 question away. Language already 8 questions in the round. You can almost entirely win a round on just language if you have like such a dominant language player that you don't even need the culture. Like you can almost just do it entirely from there. Like I think reducing it to 7, besides maybe balancing a bit more its dominance in the game, and like
Mm-hmm.
if you have just like a superior language player, you just win the round. You also give history players like the same number of questions as a myth and lit player. And I mean, you can like guarantee you ask a culture / geography every round, like uh, even if you replace a language, and it doesn't do too much, I think.
Well, no, exactly. No, it's a very good way of articulating it. You brought something to mind along the accessibility discussion, which is that so a novice right now, and I know it sort of varies year to year, but it's 3 history, 1 geography, 1 customs, or maybe it's kind of alternating back and forth. But you're asking, and the questions I don't think are too hard. And again, I think the questions themselves are accessible, but if you're asking someone to do history, oh, by the way, you gotta know some geography and you gotta know some customs, that to me is less accessible than if you just said, we're just doing history. That's all it's gonna be. And that doesn't solve, yes, I do wanna have customs asked, I do wanna have geography asked, but maybe even at the novice level, if you're saying, okay, you're gonna get your 4, and then you're gonna have and then the geography or customs is going to be a language question instead. It almost, for the historian, it's almost like, okay, I'll have my 4 focus, and then that 1 geography customs is sort of like up to everyone. Like, yeah, I can try to be the person who specializes in that, but maybe it's maybe our language person is really good at customs. Maybe it's our myth kid wants to pick up. So I think it's like have the 4, like you're saying, and then have the customs, but just don't have it be pigeonholed who should commit to that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there I guess for me at least, I don't really see how having more history questions kind of uh reduces accessibility because you can just there's so many established facts like you can definitely ask, or at least like you can change it in creative ways to avoid it. But I don't think adding more questions necessarily implies less accessibility. I think it also, some people like, I mean, from a perspective of like I think history players, I mean, you two can attest to this and I'm sure many others can, like it doesn't feel very good to know like you are having less questions than everyone else.
No.
Like you're just being told like, hey, you have to know 1,200 years of information, and you're going to get 3 questions around, and then the culture question can be gotten by literally anyone. There's you don't gain anything from being a historian, and it's like, oh, cool, thank you for letting me know that I'm not playing the same number of questions as everyone else.
No, man, you put it perfectly. Like that. That's definitely how I've felt. So I try to be honest with myself. Am I just saying this because it's, the category I'm best at, or, or would if I were watching around, take everything else out in a vacuum, would I like that better? And I don't know. I guess on the subject, one other interesting thing Mike brought up was history, I think sometimes feels like it's asking the same kinds of questions. And it's not to say it's cookie cutter, because I think actually with history, like the quid anglo significat, we don't really have that in history. Like there's a few things kind of like that, like the preceding, succeeding, but that comes up maybe like once every 7 rounds, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Mike was saying that even though it's not cookie cutter, it does seem it's either about a person or it's about a battle. Even if you ask in a creative way, kind of it is sort of about the same substance, I guess, which I kind of see what he's saying there. But I think there's also an opportunity, just like with lit, for people to become more sophisticated in the way they ask history, which people do. I think that also has evolved, but when he said that, I started thinking about it more like, maybe next time I write some history questions, I'll try to get really kind of just see if there is some like new convention I can come up with or something. Because I think there's a lot of untapped potential there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing that's been evolving in recent question writing is what you ask. Because you are right that I think a lot of history questions tend to be people or just a battle, and it's like, do you know what battle occurred in like 262? And it's like incredible. But I think it's been changing a lot, because you now have shared name questions, which I think is very cool. Can you synthesize different people and figure out their shared like person and stuff? I think that's very cool. You can ask positions, who shared the following positions, and maybe like I really should.
I like that. That's a good one. I really like that.
Yeah, I should not have said this because I don't know enough history, but maybe like Barbus, I think, was a Pontifex Maximus, something like that. Like if you have like, these connected facts that relate to something unique, like, this position, governors of like a random province. Like I think there are so many things that people just aren't like considering, because it's easy to write about a person and a battle and move on with your life. Like it's easy just to toss up like, who the son of blah, 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 fought here, led here, was consul here. Like, it's just easier. But like, once you start getting these more creative formats, it requires people to start thinking more creatively about when they're playing. They have to start like knowing, like, I mean, sure, you have to know a bit more now, but you're rewarding people for knowing more.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. And I think it does, as you're saying, it takes more time to write like kind of elaborate questions. I mean, yeah, you can go on and like, here's 5 history questions, 30 minutes, because it's just like stuff off the top of my head. But if I think and you see more people willing to do this, like the Kearneys of the world, willing to really spend the time not only writing, but thinking about, okay, how can I write new stuff, creative stuff? And that in terms of like where Kurt Thomas at now, I've never seen at any time before so many people so invested with let's not only make the game more accessible and expand it and get over those paywalls, as you said, but let's get creative. Let's see how we can, make the questions more interesting. And I think that benefits really everyone. I think the accessibility stuff is obviously like a huge initiative for everyone, but keeping it, coming up with new stuff for maybe the people who are really seasoned at too, like they appreciate that. And I think it's good to get people involved who, might otherwise say, I'm tired of it or whatever.
Yeah, no, I do think it's only going to help Kurtaman, I think, and it's going to help, I think, like a lot of people, because I think once you start having these like more creative formats, it causes people to just want to study more, because they're like, I need to now think about it like this, and it opens like pathways to so many different like ideas and information that like people have never seen put together before. Like I remember I was reading like the Hadass Greek lit book, and I was like, there's so many myth clues I can start pulling from this thing. And it's like, I never was in my life did I think I'd say, I sourced this myth clue from Hadass. But
Hmm.
it's like oh, did you know in this work there's like this really cool thing. So I mean, yeah, I think it's a good, and I think it's really productive for the game.
What is, sorry, what is Hanas? What is this, a new source or is this a,
Oh, this is the Greek lit Hadas book.
oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I just was reading it for fun, and I was like, oh, whoa, there's a lot of myth clues in here. Like, what are the odds? So it's neat to see when you can synthesize things, especially from other categories, like getting that mixture going.
I think I saw like a lit thing in Heichelheim the other day. I'd never seen it. I don't even remember what it was. I was like, oh, that's cool. That's definitely going in somewhere. So yeah, no, the cross category stuff, that's like a whole other, like, that's like the fifth dimension of like of group Tom and nerdism. It's like, oh well, check out this shit I found over here. Sorry for the language,
No, you're fine.
um no, that's really cool to see too. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of with that, I wanted to kind of ask now, do you have any advice as like an individual, coming into JCL and Kurtaman and, also coaching and stuff? Like, is there any one piece of advice, and if not, you can give multiple if you think one's too limiting, of like that you kind of wish you had heard coming in?
Um, I think, on one hand, like, this world we're in is amazing and it's very niche, and you have really wonderful friendships in it. And that will, always be kind of like our own kind of weird corner of the world. But I want people, when they go to nationals, especially because I think, like, in Latin education, you hear a fair amount about, oh, well, you want to go and, be a lawyer, like, this is great stuff to know, or, oh, all these medical terms, and you kind of hear it on that kind of basis. But I think there's the classical experience has a lot of, can have a lot of long-term positive, influences. I mean, we all sort of know that now. We all sort of say it, but, I want kids, when they go to nationals, whether they're playing Kurtaman or not, to not only enjoy kind of the uniqueness of that experience, but also to know, hey, like, this isn't like a silly thing I'm doing. Like, oh, why did I come here for a week? Like, this, like, people who are in classics they can be really successful and brainy and thoughtful. And, to see so many people, go into JCL and come out, and, it's not about where you go to school, but to see them kind of still wield that knowledge and kind of reflect on it, I think is really cool. I just give a quick example of that, because I think people talk about, oh, what can influence you, but maybe here's something more specific. Um, Writing my notes, I think, really taught me how to, synthesize information, to take like a big text and say, okay, how can I take this 2 pages and make it 4 bullet points? Like, that's something I was not good at in high school. Like, that to me is a skill I really had to work on. And doing the notes, just wanting to do the notes anyway, kind of like gave me that. And it's something I've brought to, like, researching for, content marketing. I do a fair amount of user experience writing now. So, like, all the copy you see on a web page, like, where it's like short, actionable sentences, like, even that skill, like, I kind of draw back to the notes, to writing the bullets in the notes. It's like, how can I just say, here's plainly what you need to know on a simple level? So I think for me, doing a lot of things with writing, yeah, a lot of it goes back to classics, to the notes, to just my JCL experience. So I think people would be really pleasantly surprised by kind of how they, how looking back, like, oh, that's that cool thing I did in Latin, and it helped me get better at this. So it's true. It's not just a thing we say.
Yeah, no, no. I'm really glad that you said that, because I don't think many people really realize that. I think it requires a lot of, like, once you're done and once you're like kind of thinking about it, you're like, oh, wait a second, like, this is really, and then like all the friendships you form from it is like super big. And
Yeah, and you kind of, you alluded to this earlier about the Cortana, the bloodlust thing, and, like, it's, on one level, it's funny. Like, we've all been there. We all understand, like, how competitive things can be, but I really, um, I just really want people to know, like, hey, it's okay to win, it's okay to lose, it's okay to not do well, it's okay to get beat by your biggest rival. So, whatever it is, like, it's really okay. Like, we all, like, at the end of the day, like, this is the way we talk about it and are involved in it. It is a youth organization. It is a youth academic organization. So I'm all for the, sportsmanship, being competitive. Like, we love that. But, the community that we have, so I feel like we have a really great, like, post high school kind of community of Kurtaman players, and I think it's a great vibe. I just want to make sure we extend that same vibe down to the high school level, and we don't say, oh well, they're super competitive and it's more tense because, like, it's the real thing. It's like, well, maybe, but we also can impart, I think, a lot of the kind of good vibes we feel now earlier on. And maybe people might disagree and say, no, it's not a problem, it's really great, like, everyone is good. Maybe that's the case. Like, I don't know, I'm not really in the loop on that. But I would always want kids to feel welcome, within their own state, with other states, kind of building that kind of shared community.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. I think a big thing that people kind of always lose sight of is it's supposed to be fun at the end of the day. Like, competition's great, but having fun is better and much better. And it feels much more like nice when you're having fun. Like, competition's cool and people are driven by competition, but I think having fun at the end of the day is like a very big aim.
For sure. No, the fun thing, I think that's maybe from a coaching perspective. Like, I think if I, at the end of the summer, can say that they have fun, whether we won or lost or whatever, like, to everyone, not too many stressful moments, like, okay, like, you take that and you just try to build on it. So
yeah, with that, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure to hear your story and your thoughts. It was really insightful. I enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, I mean,
thank you guys so much for having me. I think this is really cool. I'm really looking forward to hearing all the episodes you do. And if there's anything else, obviously feel free to reach out.
yeah, thank you so much. All right, take care.
All right, thanks, guys.